Welcome to the Sober Nation FM podcast, where we're putting recovery on the map. I'm your host, Jonathan Sylvester. This show is brought to you by Sobriety Engine. Do you want to take your recovery to the next level? Do you want more support, community, and fellowship? Sobriety Engine is an incredible free online community of men and women supporting each other in their recovery. You can get a ton of great tips, resources, and guidance to help you succeed in recovery and in life. Visit sobrietyengine.com to join today. Sober Nation FM is also brought to you by Recover Health. If you're ready to get fit and start living a healthier lifestyle, all while supporting your sobriety, then you can learn more about having me as your own personal fitness and nutrition coach at rcvrhealth.com. And whether you're listening to the show on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or watching on YouTube, please share this with your friends. Follow, subscribe, and leave a review. Nation, let's hop right into today's episode. Today, I'll be speaking with singer-songwriter Will Wood. Thanks again for coming on the show, Will.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Really glad to have you here, man. And I'm excited to hear more about your band and your latest album. But first, I'd like to jump right in and hear a bit about your journey in recovery. So, where did all this start for you, and what did things look like before you actually got sober?
I think it probably started the same way it starts for most people. Difficult teenage years. I think a lot of us start out that way. Seeking, coping mechanisms with the stress that comes with every cell in your body kind of exploding at once and simultaneously having to deal with whatever traumatic, whether capital or lowercase t traumatic you're talking about, experiences you're going through. I think that it probably was, probably didn't have an origin too different from most people's. Probably, I don't know if there's really too much remarkable to share about that.
Okay. Yeah. So, I mean, for me, I know that kind of looked like a little bit of, starting out drinking on the weekends,
Sure.
smoking a little weed. For me, it progressed really quickly. What did that look like for you? I mean, was it just like smoking weed every now and then? Was it straight into some harder stuff?
I was a drinker.
Okay. Yeah. Got it. And so what was the turning point that led you into recovery?
I guess the music. I'd always been, I've been writing songs since I was like 12 or 13 years old, and it always worked as like at times an escape, at other times a catharsis.
Okay.
But it didn't really go anywhere for a long time. After dropping out of college, I bummed around New Jersey, just kind of eating whatever mind-altering substance I could get my hands on and freaking out on various stages with various garage bands. And, I told myself I was working towards a goal. And to be honest, I don't know if I ever really was during that period of time. To be perfectly frank, I remember very little of it. But but eventually at some point, I think it got bad enough where I was just miserable. And I had been writing these songs that I had never really done anything with. Sure, I had helped to write songs in these bands that I was in. I'd written lyrics for songs and all that, but these things that I had written as a singer-songwriter, as this part of my identity that I had built up over the years, I never shared publicly. I never performed really. And eventually I was kind of at my wit's end, really falling apart, sort of at bottom, so to speak. And I decided, am I gonna be this thing, or am I not? Am I gonna pursue this, or am I not? I guess it was kind of like now or never, because I'm for all I know, I might be looking down into the maw of oblivion at this point. I could be, you know, teetering over the edge of a more, could have fucking died, is I guess what I'm saying. And I figured, well, if I might just fucking die, then I might as well try this one last thing I've been afraid to try, and that is start pursuing a career with my own music.
Wow.
And so I did. I went into studio and cobbled together a band out of friends who I'd made over the years in the sort of DIY music scene. And we put together my first record, and I put out the record and I quit drinking a few months later because I guess I sort of found a sense of purpose.
Wow.
You know, I started playing shows. You know, I never once played a show drunk after that. Never once drank at a show after that. You know, never with the band anyway.
Okay.
You know, because I guess I had this thing that I really, really cared about and was desperately attached to for the first time. And I started feeling a sense of responsibility to my band members and to the people who came to the shows, and kind of helped drag me out of that stuff. And sure, it took a lot of work, and it took a lot of, you know, a lot of fits and starts and failed attempts. But eventually, yeah, I'd say it was my music career that, you know, starting off, that kind of pulled me out of it.
Wow, that's pretty amazing. Yeah, I mean, that's cool that you. Well, it sounds like for you, it was a combination of things. It was as you put it, yeah, you're going to fucking die if you keep this up, but also this thing, this music that you really wanted to pursue. And I think that's cool that there was like a good thing in your life that you wanted to go after, because a lot of the times, like for me, and I think a lot of people in recovery and the struggle from addiction, there is no good thing really. It's all bad. You're gonna fucking die. You know? So that's cool that you had something else. I'm curious, you know, and I like to ask, you know, artists and musicians and singers and so on, just kind of about their relationship with the substances and the creative side of things. So I'm guessing that to an extent you use alcohol and all the other stuff as kind of a fuel initially before you got sober. What was it like getting up there on stage and performing sober those first few times?
I don't know. It felt natural.
Wow.
It felt real. It felt like it actually mattered. It felt like I was actually there, and that the things I was doing on stage actually was reaching people. And maybe it had reached people before, but I couldn't feel it. I don't know. But, you know, I had played so many shows with these bands I was kicking around with, where, you know, I was tripping, or I was high, or I was drunk, and you know, it was how do I put it? Even it just felt like a lot of the time it felt, I didn't realize how empty being on stage had the capacity to feel until I was doing it sober, as I guess the way I would put it.
Okay.
You know, when I did it sober, it was like, oh, okay, this actually can be fulfilling. This actually can be a human experience. This can be a thing where I'm not going on stage to make a spectacle of the absolute catastrophe that I am. I'm not going on stage to make a mockery of myself, or to use my dysfunction as a means of some kind of schadenfreude, or some kind of, it was I no longer felt the urge to err on the side of performance art. I no longer felt like I was going up there to make a scene. It felt like I was going up there to communicate and to entertain, to be listened to, as opposed to just to maybe shock or confuse audiences.
Yeah.
Was a lot of what my interests as an artist were before then. And yeah, I still have that in me. I still do have that inner shock rocker, you know. But I don't know. It feels a lot more human and a lot more personal.
That's pretty awesome. Yeah. Yeah. That's cool. So I want to ask, because we are here to mainly talk about recovery. So I do want to ask if there's any specifics that maybe you can share in terms of, you said you felt like your purpose for getting sober in large part was the music and finding that passion there. Was there, did you go to like a treatment center? Did you just say, okay, I'm just going to dry out, basically, I'm just going to do this? Was there anything else that you started to do for your recovery, or was it just like, man, I'm doing this music thing, like this is it?
There was there was a sort of support group
Okay.
club type thing on
Sure.
the campus of the college that I was then attending during that period of time. But otherwise, no, I didn't like do any AA stuff or anything like that.
Sure. Yeah.
It was mostly there was no program or anything. No, it was
Okay.
I didn't do it entirely alone. Of course not. I had a support group, and when I say support group, I mean the people who were coming together with expressly that intention, but also a support system interpersonally. And but no, there wasn't anything like structured about it. I was lucky that I was able to get out of it the way that I did, because I know a lot of people, they don't have the circumstances necessary to have that be possible. And whereas I was blessed to have people in my life who were there to help support me during that period of time.
Yeah. Yeah. That's great. Yeah. And I think that's a good point. That is the one. I have a lot of people on the show that come from different recovery backgrounds, if you will. And the one guiding theme that I see through all of it is that support group, just exactly as you described it. So that makes perfect sense to me. So as you were getting sober, what would you say was one of the biggest things that you struggled with, like early on in your sobriety?
Early on, I think the biggest thing I struggled with was this weird feeling that life wouldn't be full without it, that life wouldn't be enough without it was something that I needed. It was something that I needed forever. This idea that it was and there wasn't really a day that was entirely worth living without it. This idea that, this wasn't a conscious thought, but looking back, it was definitely an idea that I operated on some base level. That there was, this weird, unspoken, unconscious belief that I couldn't be okay or happy without it. That was, I think, the hardest part. But eventually, when it came to the point where I knew, okay, this really isn't actually doing anything for me, and this is really only hurting me, and that on the other side there is still life. It eventually came down to the real hard part. At that point was knowing when I've changed my mind, knowing when the other side has taken over. It's sort of just like the two warring factions in the mind, and that whichever one is in control, you're always going to believe is you, even when it's the side of you that you're most opposed to on a deeper or higher level. If that makes any sense.
Yeah, no, it does.
So, and there was always an element of that going through, is just knowing who I am and who I'm listening to inside my head.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense to me. I think that was probably the biggest thing I struggled with. Is I really like the way you described it, just thinking that, yeah, that life wasn't going to be very fulfilling or fun or enjoyable, or and I hear about people like whether they go to treatment or not, maybe someone will suggest to them like writing a letter to their drug of choice, like almost like a breakup letter. And I never did that, but that makes sense to me, because it's like, just as you were describing, it's like, man, this was my lover basically.
Right.
This was a real relationship, and that breakup was so hard. And I get exactly what you're saying. It's like, man, what is life really gonna look like without this thing in it? um and I think that's one of the reasons for me, that having other people around that had been through this and had some experience with all this and getting sober was so important, because man, I really just had to trust what these people were saying. Like, hey, life can still be pretty good without drinking or getting high. And I was really having to trust these people that was even a possibility.
Right.
you know so I do want to ask, for the listeners that aren't familiar, how would you describe your music and your performances? You describe, that there's some shock value sometimes, or there was in the past. Is there still kind of a little bit of that in your shows?
No, not so much anymore.
Okay.
If there's like an inner shock rocker, I think that's more just like a spirit that occasionally moves me more than it is a theme of my performances. When I was still uh, involved in the more Will Wood and the Tapeworms element of what I do, it was a lot more grandiose, a lot more over the top. And so, yeah, there were some histrionics on stage and something a bit more akin to shock value. A lot of, smashing my head against my piano and screaming and hollering and stuff like that. And, whereas nowadays I mostly just kind of go on stage and play and try and let the music speak for itself, and try and be something akin to an authentic version of myself, whatever that might be. I mean, I'm a singer-songwriter, but my instrument is my instrument's piano, so it's a lot of piano-led rock and pop with some experimental elements to it. So I screw around a lot with various genres. It's kind of hard for me to really put a name on a lot of other people. They've gone out and put names on it that I've found to be disappointingly, what's the word I'm looking for? Come on. Reductive. That's the word I'm looking for. Reductive. Yeah. So some of what I do has this kind of like darker jazz cabaret kind of bent to it, and then other parts of what I do is it's just folk music, or like kind of like a Randy Newman on acid sort of feel. And
I like that description.
Thank you. And so like, it's kind of all over the place. It's tough for me to describe.
Well, that's all right. It'll give the listeners that haven't tuned in another reason to check you out, right? Now, your latest album, I believe, is titled The Normal Album, right? That's your latest album, correct? And I think you guys actually crowdfunded this, right?
Yeah.
So how did all that work out?
Well, it had been years since I had put out my last record.
Okay.
So I put out a record in 2015, Everything Is a Lot, and that was my first album. That was the one that I put together towards the end of my drinking career. before I, switched professional focuses.
Yeah.
And the and I was given very little time to follow it up because I was given this opportunity to work with this producer who had like a 4-month window before he had to go on tour with Dillinger Escape Plan. And so I had to cobble together whatever I could whatever I had in my repertoire in my head, and kind of assemble that last minute. And because I was working with this death metal producer and I'd always wanted to do this like really experimental album and I had so little time, the thing turned out to be this really wild, screaming, roaring face paint and saxophone sound. And and that I spat out in like 2016, and you know then didn't put anything out for years and didn't record anything for years. And it wasn't because I didn't want to, and that record was such a result of the first months of sobriety, because it was written in the first months and then recorded in the first months. And that period when you're first stepping out of that haze can be tumultuous, because you end up feeling things for the first time in a long time. And you end up experiencing the full breadth of human emotion, and it can be very overwhelming, and it can be a very an alien world you're stepping into. And so the album sounds a certain way, and so for years I was experiencing this dissatisfaction because the only version of me that had been out there and now had people aware of it was this version of me who only existed for a few months of my life while coming out of that haze. And one that was so heavily altered by that state of mind, and so affected by it. And so, the album was such a product of the experiences that went into the recording of it, experiences that are so unlike anything I've had since, and hopefully will never have again. That it was a strange feeling, kind of walking around having this version of me that I can't possibly relate to anymore projected back at me. But I never had the opportunity to put together something to follow it up until eventually, when I had started to build this following, I went, it's time. I can't keep sitting on these songs I've been writing since then. I can't keep, letting this second record define me completely. I need to put something new out. And so, I dropped "And the Tapeworms" from my name. I mean, you can still find the Will Wood and the Tapeworms albums on Spotify, but I released a new album under the solo moniker, and the crowdfunding was my means of overcoming the fact that I had no opportunity. Nobody was knocking down my door saying, "Hey, come record." I didn't have any cash to go in the studio and just start. And so I figured, all right, let's see what happens. I crowdfunded my second record, but it was such a cheaper endeavor that what didn't feel like some big risk. It didn't feel like I was really putting myself out there like that, at least not as much. It was still a big risk, and it still was a big deal, and like really fulfilling to see people come together and fund the record. But this one, it was a major undertaking because it was a big record with a lot of big ideas, and I wanted to redefine myself and do so in a very strong way. And so I set out with this goal to try and raise $15,000 to record what I figured, all right, this is it, baby. This is going to be my magnum opus. And I ended up raising that 15K in the first 24 hours. And
wow.
And then eventually over the course of the campaign, raising closer to 30. And and I sold all kinds of things as part of it. I let people book me to play in their backyards. There's still videos of that floating around on YouTube. I had people pay to come in and participate in the recording of like gang vocals on the record. Did like pre-orders and special editions and stuff like that. And it was a very involved process, and it really works. I recommend to any artist who's uncertain of where to start, feels like they don't have the right opportunities, to try Indiegogo out and see what they can get out of it, because it can be a very effective tool for finding funding without having some label or what have you.
Yeah, yeah. But I love how you described like just the putting yourself out there, like how much, of that was required to say like, okay, I'm going to try to do this thing. No one's coming at me, just giving me a check to do this. So I'm going to need you guys to, we'll really see if people want to hear more from me.
Well, I guess that's kind of like the risk you take is like, do I believe in myself? More importantly, do I believe $15,000 worth in myself? And then to have people come back and say, no, we believe $30,000 in you, was, it was very encouraging. And I think that a lot of that energy kind of provided momentum for the rest of this recording process. Rest of the production, which was, very, very different, very unique, unlike the other processes I've been through in a lot of ways.
Yeah, that's awesome. Well, momentum, and I'm sure definitely some motivation as well. That's pretty cool when you have a response like that, when you really put yourself out there and you're, and you're vulnerable like that, to say the least. That's pretty incredible. So what's next? What are you working on anything else right now?
Right now I'm working on a soundtrack. And when I'm done with that one, I plan to start crowdfunding for my next major release, which I intend to be a bit more of a straightforward and honest representation of who I am as a musician and as a person. Something a bit more intimate and a bit more personal, less wrapped up in fancy words and excessive metaphor and what have you. A lot of very blunt stuff. Because being an artist and going through the ups and downs of having a career in the arts is very much an emotional journey. And I think a lot of people can see it kind of mapped in my discography. That my first record, it sounds real drunk. It's fallen all over the place. It's not to a click track. It's, the content of the songs is clearly influenced by or about, substance abuse and primarily alcohol. And then the second record, I think it does kind of sound like somebody coming out the other side of that going, oh my God, I'm alive. What the fuck is this? And then the most recent record, the Normal album, is very much an exploration of what's happened since then. The person I've become since starting recovery, and then more importantly, or just as importantly, rather, the person I started to become after, receiving my bipolar diagnosis and getting treatment for that. And so I'm curious to see what this next project will be. My adjustment to the perhaps one of the most dangerous mind-altering substances out there, and that is attention from a large number of people. That's a pretty pretty dangerous addiction in and of itself. But so yeah, I'm always cooking up something. But right now I'm just focusing on this soundtrack, and once that's out, I hope to continue that sort of emotional trajectory you can see in my records, and kind of keep telling this story that I guess, been telling accidentally.
Yeah.
The story I've been kind of accidentally letting slip between the lines of my lyrics. I don't know.
Right. Yeah. No, I mean, it sounds like as you've been evolving, your music has been evolving right along with you. I think that's a pretty awesome thing. I mean, if anything, that just requires a lot of, I don't know, honesty. And I think that's to be able to, express what's going on with you in such a creative way and try all these different things. I think that's pretty cool. And you just referred to, maybe what could be teetering sometimes on an addiction to attention. I want to use that as a segue back into recovery for a second here. And, a lot of the times we'll hear people talk about, these addictions to other things like attention from people, or let's say like, gambling or food or video games or porn, as not being real addictions necessarily. What are your thoughts on that? I'm just curious.
Well, first I want to apologize if I'm coming across as cagey. I have that's just my terrible personality, but it's also, I knew that there was going to be conversation about recovery, obviously. But I'm sure you get this a lot. Maybe you don't, but I'd imagine that you do. When dealing with a theme like this, that can at times be a very sensitive and vulnerable topic for a lot of people. That a lot of people struggle at first with this idea of, okay, how much am I talking about? What am I sharing and when? What is, what kind of space is this? Is this a safe space? And because here between you and I feel a sense of comfort and a sense of we're in a safe space.
Right.
The second this goes on the internet, this is no longer happening in my
protect
office.
yourself. Yeah.
Right. And so if I'm coming across as stilted, and I notice that I know that you've picked up on hesitancies coming from me, and I want to just just explain that, like, this is something that, like, it's tough. So talking about one of the side effects of the addiction to attention can be negative attention, and so it's tough to navigate.
Sure. Yeah.
And so if I'm coming across as at all curt, or I guess cagey, I think is the right word, I just I don't want you to take this as me I do want to have an open and honest and real conversation about this kind of stuff. It's just, I just ask for, not that I don't, I'm just asking for, and I'm sure you have tons of patience with me while I, try and stumble through that.
Sure. Yeah.
So that being said, talking about that stuff, the experience is real regardless of what words you want to apply to it. A lot of people will, say it's not an addiction. Well, it functions just like one. So what's the point? Why are you bothering to say it's not an addiction? Why are you, what are you trying to accomplish there? And I think that a lot of people, what they're trying to accomplish is to invalidate the struggle. And the truth of the matter is that if somebody has a relationship with, say, gambling or food or porn or whatever, that is mechanically similar to addiction, then I don't see any reason not to call it what it is. And the human body is designed to glom onto things. Our neuroplasticity exists so that we can create these connections. This reward circuitry can discover its targets and then keep pursuing them. And anything can hijack it if it's the right level of stimulation, and the right kind of stimulation has the right kind of effect on the individual. And so, it bums me out when people say, yeah, no, those aren't real addictions, because, define real. And if you're, defining your terms, I mean, why is that not? Why would that not be a real one? Because it's not a drug? Well, that's, I don't see any reason why it has to be an illegal substance, or a substance that, intoxicates your body in order for it to be a substance that intoxicates you.
Right.
So I think I think it's all legitimate. I think if somebody's struggling with something, they're struggling with something. And, and I don't think it really matters what you're calling it. But I do recommend that people who hesitate to call those things addiction, give calling it an addiction a shot, because the worst thing that happens when you do that is give somebody a chance to have the conversation in their own terms and feel validated and understood. and give somebody a framework by which they can approach what you may hesitate to call recovery, but is recovery. When I say you, I just mean one. I don't mean you.
Sure. Yeah.
Make claims as to what your opinion on this stuff might be. I mean, what do you think about that?
Yeah, no, I'm completely with you there. I've probably shared this in the last 10 episodes now, that one of the biggest and main reasons that I was interested in doing this podcast is really because early on in sobriety, I had a pretty one-dimensional look at things, meaning that what worked for me, specifically a 12-step program, should work for you. And if it doesn't work for you, then basically you're just not doing it right. Right. This is the only way to do it. And slowly but surely, my thinking about that has changed. And I think it only makes sense because, look, it's not like that's the only thing I'm doing for my recovery. I'm doing a lot of other things. Like fitness is something that's really important to me. My physical health is a big part of my recovery. For you, music is part of your deal. So that's kind of like the solution side of things. Now, if we look at the problem side of things, who am I to say that like someone doesn't have an issue with food or gambling or whatever? I mean, it makes sense to me because early on in sobriety, I was talking to a couple of my buddies, and man, when I got sober, I was broke as shit. Okay. And like, I think a lot of us probably are.
Oh yeah.
And as I started working, and getting a little money in my pocket, because, when you're not spending it all on drugs and alcohol, that'll happen. That's just a direct result of getting sober. Right. Man, I love sneakers. And I started buying fucking sneakers all the time, man. And like to the point of where like my phone would be eBay going off in the middle of the night saying, hey, this auction's about to end for these sneakers that you're probably never even going to wear. Right. And, it sounds so stupid. I hear it. I hear how stupid it sounds. Right. But at the same time, it was this thing that was kind of, to a degree, running my life. I mean, it was waking me up in the middle of the night, So yeah, I mean, it makes sense to me. And I think for a lot of us, that's just the way our brains are wired. And, I mentioned the fitness thing. Like I had to really watch it. For me early on in sobriety, I had to be really careful that wasn't turning into more of a negative than a positive. And because I think that can happen with a lot of stuff. I think that can, it's like, I've heard the joke many times and put a lot of different ways. If someone presented me with a pill to cure addiction, I would say, well, what does two of them do? You know what I mean?
Yeah, I think it's just a matter. It's kind of just how a lot of us are wired. It's just, I remember when I was first, trying to quit drinking, I think it was my dad who said something like, well, I mean, he wasn't, he wanted to support me trying to have the most, universal and like I think every parent's hope, or not every, but most parents' hope for their kids would be, well, I hope that he can have a glass of wine with dinner.
Right.
Because to people who aren't addicts, that's, that's fine. And it can be a nice little thing to have, I have a glass of wine. I feel relaxed and sociable and it tastes good. And here we are, and he wanted that for me. He wanted a normal life for me. And he wanted that kind of health for me. And, that wasn't, at that point, I knew it wasn't possible.
Yeah.
But, he didn't know that, this was new for him, he had never, he didn't know where I was. And he said something like, well, I hope that, you may still find that, you're young, you may still find that you're able to, just, you can just have one or two. And I said something like, you know, if I found that I could have just one or two, that would be the greatest day of my life. And he just laughed. Okay, I get it. You know, like, you know, because that it does just show how you're wired. It's that, you know, yeah, if I could control my drinking, that would be the greatest thing that ever happened to me, because that would mean I could drink all I wanted. You know, so it's like it's hardwired in there. You know, it's not just the hooks of the addiction. There's something deeper going on there too, I think.
Yeah.
And so I think it can come in a lot of different forms. And it can express itself in a lot of different ways. I'm not trying to suggest that you had or have a sneaker addiction. You may identify it as such, but you know, you know, I'm just saying that I think that there's just like there's a gap that's always just trying to be filled. And I think that the goal is just trying to find the thing that fills the gap in a way that doesn't hurt us. And for some people it's religion, for some people it's family, for some people it's sneakers, for some people it's whatever. I'm looking around the room trying to find examples of it. For nobody is it vaping, I'll tell you that. Here I am talking to you about recovery. It's like, you know, so there's always something. I don't know. For me, when I first quit drinking, I turned to coffee, as I know a lot of alcoholics do. And I would drink coffee to the point where I was high. It wasn't just I was wired. I would start, like, you know, it would get psychedelic just from way too much coffee. And so, you know, it's there's an instinct in there that I think goes beyond just the chemical hooks that, you know, can be found in an addict's relationship to any element of their life. So.
Yeah, that's well said. I was laughing to myself as you were describing the conversation with your dad, because I remember right after I got out of rehab, I was talking to my mom, and we were up at my grandparents' house. And, you know, it's interesting, like just the family dynamic, right? And even my mom, who I thought was like pretty clued in on what was going on and where I was being really open and honest. You know, my grandma offered me a beer at like 30 days sober or something. And I didn't even say anything. You know, I understand, like, my grandparents just, they're not really getting it. Fine. And my mom was like, no, he can't have a beer maybe a year from now. And I just kind of laughed. I was like, yeah, I don't know. We'll see. Yeah, but I get what you're saying. Like, I just knew, for me, like, it's you know, it's not in the cards. I've tried it. And I think for me personally, just abstinence is, you know, I think that's the only way to go. And it's not like it's a bad thing. Like, it's just made my life better. And it sounds like for you, you know, you've found a lot in that. You found a lot in your music. And, you know, as I described it, I think it sounds like from what you've said, there's just been this whole evolution. And you mentioned, you know, legal things. And we've seen a lot of countries and even some states more recently legalizing, decriminalizing different drugs. Do you think that's a good or a bad thing for addicts? Like, how do you think that's affecting addicts and just maybe a move towards recovery, or if it is even a move towards recovery?
I think that I'm a pretty firm believer that the prohibition of drugs is not helping anybody.
Yeah.
I think that because I don't, nobody becomes an addict because they're having a good time. Nobody gets hooked on drugs because they're, you know, happy and well adjusted and have good life circumstances. And, you know, obviously when I say nobody, I'm sure there are people out there who never touch a drop of booze and are perfectly fine. And then one day they're curious, and then the next thing they know, they're falling down, you know, the rabbit hole. But my point is simply that for the most part, you know, nobody's reaching for that kind of self-medication, self-soothing, whatever you want to call it, if everything's okay. And throwing people in jail because they had they had something, they had an object in their possession, it's not gonna, they're not gonna come out the other side going, wow, I no longer want to do that. They're gonna come out the other side going, well, now I have no job prospects, I have no home, I've got no reason to live. The only thing I've learned over the past few years is how to survive in a violent world. And so anyway, I'm gonna go get high. You know, it's and this idea that it could reduce crime surrounding drugs, I think, is also silly, because it's already illegal to shoot someone or hold up a liquor store. So you don't need to also make it illegal to do the drugs that might fuel that, because it's the existence of it's the criminalization that leads to the existence of the black market, that leads to the gang activity and the law breaking and that kind of stuff in the first place. You know, I don't argue that drugs are good for society, or that they should be all, you know, perfectly acceptable, and we should all be allowed to, you know, or not allowed to, but we should all just go to a party and, you know, smoke crack with your buddies and have that be like having a glass of wine with dinner. But I don't think that anybody should ever be put in jail for what they choose to put in their bodies, or what they can't help but choose to put in their bodies, what they choose not to but still can't stop, because that's just it doesn't do anything. It just, you know, it just makes it so that it's like how do I put it? I'm okay, maybe this is a little bit of a tangent, but when I was first quitting drinking, an instrumental part of getting out of that cycle, this might sound kind of weird, was the Netflix show Bojack Horseman, because it painted a portrait of a character who was so deeply flawed, and it was so fueled by his alcoholism, but it painted a sympathetic portrait of him. The characters in the show might have hated Bojack, but the show didn't hate Bojack. The writers didn't hate Bojack. They felt for him. He was not a good guy. He was all messed up. He was a jerk, and he was a drunk, and he made everybody miserable. But you saw his psychodynamics. You saw what led him from one place to the next. And they showed what made him what he was. And because they humanized this villain, you know, I watched that and I went, I am not alone in my troublesome behavior, in the way in which my addiction has led me to behave in ways I know I otherwise wouldn't. I'm not alone in being this kind of mess of a person whose emotional dysfunction is causing pain to himself and everyone around him. I'm not alone, and not only am I not alone, but I'm still a human being and I'm still worthy of love. The show doesn't hate Bojack. Why should I hate Will? And so it was seeing this sort of forgiveness that helped me feel like I was worth saving. And I think that there might be an element of that at play here. That if we live in a society that loathes and abhors drugs and drug addicts, then you're going to see a lot of drug addicts who loathe and abhor themselves because they're raised to do so. They're taught through the narrative of our culture that there's something wrong with their character, that it's not just, that it's not, that they deserve judgment, that, you know, if our society is built on drug users go to jail, then drug users are going to feel like they're supposed to be in jail. And if somebody feels like they're supposed to be in jail, they're not going to make as many, you know, they're not going to be in a good place. How are you going to recover if you don't think you deserve anything but being locked up in a cage with a bunch of other people who've been locked up in cages for years, struggling to get by, fighting for your life, and then being spat out the other side by the system and left with nowhere to go except back to drugs? So, like, you know, I think that it goes deeper than even just a policy problem. I think it's a cultural problem too. And it goes deep. And I think that the more we punish drug users, the more drug users are going to punish themselves, because that's really the drug cycle in the first place.
Wow. Wow.
So, yeah, I think people shouldn't be in jail for what they put in their bodies, and people also shouldn't feel like they have to be in jail for what they put in their bodies, because that just makes them want to put more stuff in their bodies. I don't know.
That's really well said. And I mean, you just said a lot there, but I think the aspect that I had never thought about um, is really just that idea of how, with this cycle that's been going on for so long, and this, I'm just going to sum it up with the war on drugs, basically. And uh, yeah, I mean, how are addicts or people that are struggling with this, like, how are they feeling about themselves? I mean, yeah, it really does perpetuate this. I'm just going to call it, for myself, how I felt like I'm a piece of shit. I don't deserve to have a happy life.
Yeah.
And I feel that way about me already. And society's saying I should feel that way.
Right. Yeah.
So there it is.
Like and that's I think a problem with our culture in general, is this idea that retributive punishment, retributive justice is somehow going to solve anything.
Yeah.
I think it solves very little. Sometimes it works as a deterrent for some people in some situations, but when it comes down to it, our whole system is based around this weird, Hammurabi sort of like eye for an eye sort of thing. And I don't think, like, I feel like this idea exists because when somebody's punching you in the face, if you punch them in the face, they'll stop punching you in the face. But addicts aren't punching you in the face. They're punching themselves in the face.
Right.
So you punching them in the face isn't going to make them stop punching. So like, and
yeah.
So,
that best analogy for addiction I've heard by far here.
Yeah. You got fucking a bottle of Wild Turkey 101 grabbing your arm and going, stop hitting yourself, stop hitting yourself.
Exactly. Yeah.
So, yeah. I don't know. I mean, would you say you agree? Do you feel like that's...
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. I mean, I agree with everything you've said. And I really hope that I'd like to think that things are starting to change, and that the conversation is starting to change. And I'd like to think from a policy perspective that we're starting to at least see the people who make these decisions become even slightly swayed to be more open-minded to the idea that this punishing people has not worked. And I think, really, man, for me, what it comes down to is that the whole idea of this, again, I'm just going to refer to it as a war on drugs, because that's kind of what it all started out as, and all these crazy harsh punishments and all that. It doesn't stop anyone from getting the drugs.
Yeah.
I mean, if anything, like, it makes it more plentiful, and so I think that does it for me. There's so much more than that, right? And you described a lot of that, but I think for me, it can just be summed up as, it's not working because anyone can go right down the street, more than likely, and get exactly what they're looking for. And that's, so this isn't working, and that's the gist of it. So I think that's well said on your part. And I was certainly one of the people continually punching myself in the face. So I get that as well. Before we wrap up, Will, I just want to ask if there's maybe one piece of advice that you'd like to share with the Sober Nation, whether it be for, someone that's just coming into this deal, just thinking about getting sober, they're trying to get sober, they're sober, and maybe they're struggling a little bit. Just if you'd have any advice that you'd like to share with them.
I think that even some of the most awful versions of ourselves, even some of the most seemingly hopeless people in the world, are worth hoping for and are deserving of recovery and of a better life and of happiness. Because I don't think I believe in the idea of deserve anyway. We're all just people, and there's no reason to think that suffering is ever good. And So when you're down there at the bottom of the barrel, just, hating yourself and punching yourself in the face, and then hating yourself for punching yourself in the face, I think it's, maybe worth keeping in mind that you're not alone. No matter how alone you might think you are, you're not. You are never alone. And you are never past a point where you no longer deserve to be seen and understood and cared for. I think that was one of the most important things that I recognized in the earliest days of my recovery. And so I want to just say that. I wish I had better words for it today.
No, man, I think you actually described it pretty well. Everyone deserves love, and everyone deserves another chance, and everyone deserves a shot at recovery. I think is what I just picked up out of that, and I think that's pretty awesome advice right there. So be sure to check out Will Wood and his new album, The Normal Album, wherever you stream music. Thanks again for coming on the show, Will.
Thanks for having me, John. Really appreciate it.
Be sure to check out the show notes for all the info from today's episode. Sober Nation FM is brought to you by Sobriety Engine. Sobriety Engine is a free online community of men and women supporting each other in their recovery. Visit sobrietyengine.com to join today. This show is also brought to you by Recover Health. If you're ready to get fit and start living a healthier lifestyle while supporting your sobriety, you can learn more about having me as your own personal fitness and nutrition coach at rcvrhealth.com. And again, whether you're listening to the show on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or watching on YouTube, please share this with your friends, follow, subscribe, and leave us a review. Nation, thanks for tuning in, and I'll see you next time.